All right. Welcome everyone to week 5, episode 5 of Silver Scraps. Today we have a smaller crew. Mr. Decker, that Decker guy is unable to join us today, but we do have the glorious Leper and the glorious Colonel. Looking at the stream, it's myself at the top, as it should be, followed by Leper right below, and then where he belongs, Mr. Colonel, the foundation, supporting everything. See where I was
It's
going with that?
nice
I was
to
going to flip
know
it
that the
around.
tech solution is spreading. The
Viva
tech solution,
la tech
Viva la
solution.
tech solution. However, that doesn't necessarily reflect accurate standings right now. Colonel is clearly the top dog right now.
We just need to we're just trying to get ourselves hyped up, Colonel's just walking all over us organizationally, and
Absolutely,
we've gotta take
absolutely.
our wins where we can.
In two leagues,
In two
Revolution gets to
leagues.
lose to MIT in 2 leagues
Hey,
now.
this morning, our ADC was like, oh, when I mentioned we're recording Silver Scraps this morning, our ADC is like, oh yeah, we get to hear about how Revolution went 0-4. He originally said 4-0 against MIT, and I'm like, dude, what are you smoking, buddy?
Really nice things. The hallucinogens were certainly hitting.
Yes. But no, it's been a great week. For anyone that's not aware, there's two IBS leagues running right now. There's ZGG, and then this new one, EDL. That's what we're referencing. It's basically just the MIT Revolution SmackDown over there. I'm kidding.
Dude, Chicago will rise.
Chicago will rise. I'm really excited about multiple leagues and multiple more games.
Even better storyline. Sorry, Submersive Gaming, the underwater team, is becoming Subversive Gaming, the team of subverting expectations.
Dude, I am so excited to get into it and talk about those guys. It's gonna be wild.
Before we do that though, since this is our first time actually doing a season of Silver Scraps and not actually just doing playoffs, we are going to be doing a mid-season player ranking episode next week. And we want input from the community. If you go to the ZGG Discord, in the announcements channel, I have a form. Because some people have not filled out the form correctly, I'm going to say how you fill it out now. Some people really, really have very strong opinions about teams that they shouldn't be talking about. The idea of the form is that you are going to be talking about your division. We feel that players are going to have more of an accurate sense of things about players that they've played against. So you're going to put in 2 names for players in your division that are not on your team, so that other people that you've played against that you feel are very important players to their team for each role. We've got some interesting results already, and that we individually may probably not agree with. And so you will get to see what the general community thinks compared to what we individually think. So please fill that out. There's 12 responses right now. The more data we have, the more interesting it becomes. Because If we have 5 people that all say that Colonel Cannon is the best top laner, that's great.
They'd be right.
And I really, really think that Colonel's a great top laner. But he's not playing in the league. But that's what the data shows. So more data, the better.
Although they'd be correct.
Now, I'm just saying, too, we can also have some really weird results, like the fact that CB Royal, the gold team, is going to win IBS. Like that's some of the weird data that we've gotten.
I mean, and similarly, to contest with Colonel being the best player in the top lane, I think I'm a little iffy on that because I think Volibear is also the best player in the top lane.
Yes, we have had people fill out champions rather than players.
To be fair, totally understand. Top laners are really just kind of a mindless mob that just play the same 5 champions over and over again. They're all replaceable. Degenerate top laners, all that stuff.
Annie for best mid.
Anyways,
with that brief rant that took way longer in my head than I thought it would, we're gonna go over to Colonel for what happened last week.
There we go. The week 4 results are a little bit interesting, but I think there'll be some big changes going into week 5. Look at Shadow House first. MIT with the 2-0 on Revolution. We talked about it a minute ago. That actually is a 4-0 if you count EDL. Um, SG taking down Crosspoint in a pretty convincing fashion on stream. It was very impressive from Subversive. Going to be completely honest. And then FTD, the interesting one, 2-0 versus Artquake. Before we go into Void, do you want to talk about this a little from being
literally
in the driver's seat?
2 hours worth of League of Legends right there.
Yeah, it was a long, grueling series. I personally was like slideshowing. I was like playing a PowerPoint presentation in both games. So it was just Arcquake managed to lose both games with a gold lead against 4.5 players. Is the way that I kind of have to look at it. And it wasn't exactly in a fashion where we felt like it was just one extra fight at the end that made it happen, if that makes sense. It was this kind of thing where it felt in both games closer than it was. We clearly were behind, but it didn't. For me, the way I'll say it is it doesn't inspire a good lot of confidence in Arcquake the way that those games went.
Colonel, what's your response?
So, yeah, I would argue just a little bit against that because it seemed like when Arc was put in a position where their early game and their mid game decision making doesn't just roll them straight into a Nexus, that their late game decision making is incredibly lackluster. But this is going to be, we were talking about this a little bit before the show started. I think this is more so less of a test on the players and more so a test on the organization. Arcanists are a relatively new organization. They have found success in other leagues before entering ZGG. But if they can have the infrastructure, have the coaching staff to fix this, then Arc looks like a very strong competitor. But if they can't, I'm worried for where they'll end up.
I have to agree with you a little bit there. I just want to kind of expand on that thought about, what does this week tell us about next? Like, what does this week set up for next week, right? So it's very clear that they had massive gold leads, that they were winning the game, that they were showing that they were, at least for the first 2/3 of each game, the better team. Now, when I say 2/3 of each game, that was basically 1/3 was one normal game of League of Legends at this point, right? Like, this was a massive series. However, to me, I have to agree that a good team will lose games like that. A good team, sorry, not a good team, a team that has potential, right? A team that has the strengths that Arc has will lose games like this, and this is the time. This is with every team that's like this for them to step up and figure out how do we close games out, right? How do we finish a game? That's the biggest thing to me is they were winning and then they didn't know what to do to close the game out. I didn't necessarily get a chance to watch the games or anything like that, but just by the numbers, they didn't finish things out. Leper, what do you think, man? What are your thoughts?
Well, a lot of it I lay in the way that the team kind of functions, right? They are a top lane carry team, which isn't exactly the best thing for closing out long games or particularly even games. It was very clear from the way that they played, at least from my end, with what I could watch of those games, that Captain Ryu is their win condition by far. And the other thing I would say is that I think there are definitive champion pool issues that I think Arc is going to have struggles against for the rest of the season.
I think that's totally fair, but a lot to be determined. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But first,
but by no means are they out of the picture.
Yes.
It's just
absolutely
they've gone down in where I held them.
Yeah, but let's talk about the Void for a second. We also have some less interesting, but also little bit head scratching results here. CBR with a 2-0 over VBU.
That's
So
impressive.
that surprised me when I first saw it.
Same, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to jump in
and
real
then
quick.
also
Sorry. Go ahead.
Beyblade 2-0. You're good. Just wanted to make sure that we mentioned it, that BB did get the 2-0 over Abyssal.
To both of these games. So last week I expected all 2-1s across the board, and I got completely flipped over on this one. Everything was 2-0s, and the most egregious to me was like Shadow Isles, Rev vs MIT. Was hoping for a 2-1, and then Void. I was hoping for a 2-1 out of CBR VBU. I think I expected. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what I expected. I think I was on the was I on the CBR train at this point?
I really sold you on the idea that whoever won game 1 was going to mental
Yes.
boom. That's what happened.
Was going to no. I thought you said whoever won game 1 was going to lose.
Yeah, so whoever won game 1 was going to mental boom, and the other team was going to win.
Which didn't quite pan out, but some
It
interesting
did not go the way that I thought it would at all.
Which to me is a testament to CBI, right? I did not have much faith with them at the beginning of the season, especially after their loss to Beyblades in I think week 2. But they have clearly shown that they have this resilience. I'm a big fan of their bot lane. I'm a big fan of their drafting. So we talked about Arcquake requiring like the next step for them is how organizationally from an infrastructure perspective do they recover from the last couple weeks, right? They clearly have potential. Now they need to realize that potential through support. I think CBR is a team that has some of that X factor with their behind the scenes staff, because honestly their drafting, they have a style which to me what I was able to see is they draft carry tops, scaling carry, like kind of bruiser brawly duelist carry tops. They draft hyper scaling, generally like fairly decent late game scaling ADCs and mid laners, and supportive jungle, supportive support, obviously. And they kind of create these inevitable team comps, right? Like Volibear or Anivia or Kaisa. These comps that if you don't beat them by 30 minutes, by 35 minutes, they're going to become this, like, it's like a team of Udyrs, kind of, right? Not on that level, but it feels similar to that, where it's like there's this inevitability to it. They choke the other team out. They play towards objectives, and they just suffocate, right? If they don't roll early, they're going to win eventually because of the way they draft, because of the way they play these lanes.
Yeah, it's sort of an answer to that. On the other side of the rift, is that's something that I've been incredibly worried for VBU about. So in the direct head-to-head, is interesting to see how CBR was so one-sidedly, because VBU, I forget which episode, I think it was episode 2 or 3, where I just like tore in their coaching staff because the drafting was extremely worrying from the side of VBU, and then going up against CBR that is so confident in what their style is and how to draft their style and what they're planning on doing before the game is even started. They seem so much more confident in their style of gameplay, and obviously in the head-to-head, when VBU is unable to really have that cohesion, that stylistic way of playing, that CBR just took it pretty one-sidedly.
We lost you a little bit there, but I think I got the gist, where it's like your internet's struggling a little bit, but
I mean, we'll blame it on I don't know what.
We'll blame it on karma. You're too
good.
I
was going to say, well, Karma's a great champion, but
shut the fuck up. I'm kidding.
Beyblades versus Abyssal. I mean, I don't think this was. I think this was one that we all kind of thought was going to be a 2-0.
I was the only one that had faith in Abyssal.
Well, it's good to know that I have confidence when I bet against you, Tex.
I think whatever I predict, everyone should just bet on the opposite, because whether it's 2-0s versus 2-1s or just the straight up whoever comes out on top, because I did not expect Beyblades and Abyssal to be as one-sided as it was. Is Beyblades kind of like subversive for the Void? Are they a team that was rough early, is growing into some potential? What are your guys' thoughts?
See, how would I put this in the best way that I can? The Beyblades team itself, right? I think we have done a disservice to, given their performance, given the players that they have. CCG Knapp, Willow Haven are fantastic players in their role in relation to the entire league, not just the Void. But I think a lot of our hesitations were having seen first to frontline, having seen other issues in the past coming from the Beyblade's parent organization. And so, with how they're doing now, it's really hard to look at them as anything but a serious contender given the way that things are falling in the Void.
Colonel, do you have thoughts?
I think that it's important to know. It's a little bit tangential, but Beyblades has this roster that's been pretty confidently upper middle table, but we're definitely going to be hitting on it a little bit later in the show. But with a lot of other teams in the division changing up their rosters, having was I lost?
Nope, you've been coming through clear this time.
Nope, I'm good. All right. My ping says I hit 1,500. But with all these different teams that we're expecting to be so good, all of a sudden having a little bit of problems and roster changes that I didn't necessarily expect nor want. I think Beyblades is a serious question mark now, where the top of the table has been opened, and I think they are potentially one of the strongest contenders to fill that spot, fill that void, and take up the top of the table in this group.
One thought on that, and then I want to transition to a thought I had about Abyssal from this match. So looking at these standings, the Fallen and CBR seem like a lock for 1 and 2, generally speaking, for playoffs. And then VBU is sliding, right? Like VBU is not. It's unclear to me how strongly VBU can hold on to their playoff spot, right? If GSG makes a second round robin surge, and Beyblades continues to step up, there could be a situation where VBU doesn't even make it to playoffs. Like there's this volatility in the bottom middle of the void that I'm really excited to see how it plays out. Recognizing that Shadow Isles has its own volatility in a similar flavor, but it's a little bit more across the entire division, right? Like 1 and 6 in Shadow Isles are pretty locked in. Everything else is just a free for all. Now, my last thought about Beyblades here versus Abyssal is Abyssal kind of. So game 1 was a stop. Game 1 was Beyblades just walking over them mid jungle synergy, hard carry through the Pantheon, and they won the game short. Second game was a lot closer. One of the things that I saw was while, if I remember correctly, let me bring up my notes real quick. There was not a massive gold lead across. Let's see. There was a minimal goal difference between each respective matchup, right? So top versus top, not a crazy goal diff across the game. Same with each of the other roles, but nor did I feel like it was crazy across the game. It just felt like Abyssal kind of just. It was an even game, and Abyssal just kind of lost it. They just kind of rolled over. There was not a lot that happened to say this team fight snowballed it against them. This series of bad decisions here or there swung it one way or the other. It was just they're kind of losing, and then the game ended, right? And that to me signals that I don't know if I have a lot of confidence in this team going forward. I think they have pieces, but I don't know where they're going to end up at in the future, right? At the end of the season and going forward, what's going to happen? Similar thing. How's that infrastructure? How's it behind the scenes going to support this team? Colonel, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, the one thing that worries me is a little bit off, but it's definitely related pretty closely. Abyssal is a team that has struggled so heavily. And I think a lot of that comes down to what we were talking about last week, in that they don't really have such a great idea of exactly what they want to do, of exactly how they want to play the game. And with a lot of other teams that were struggling, where teams like Subversive, I think, have figured that out. They have gotten a better understanding of what they want to do and how they want to play. And we're seeing in the other side of the group, Subversive all of a sudden a huge 180 and a very interesting playoff race now because of Subversive finding that idea, that play style that they want to play with. So while I'm worried for Abyssal, I think if they do find that, if they do start to understand exactly what it is that they want to be doing before they ever step foot on the Rift, I think there's still a lot of hope for this roster. I think it's going to come down to finding out exactly how you want to play and playing into that, though.
Subversive's the best team I've ever seen in any league at doing that. I'm not even joking.
They're on a whole nother, like, they're in a whole nother realm. Not that they're like the amazing, the best team we've ever seen, but it's just such a interesting story.
I have a lot of thoughts on what they do, and it's kind of genius, actually, what they do.
Let's jump into the next set of slides here. We want to cover what's known and what's still unknown about these different teams. Let me get us over there. And we can maybe use that as a transition to talk about what we know and what we don't know. So let's start on the right side here and talk about Subversive. What do we not know, and
what would do? Well, we know absolutely nothing about Shadow Isles anymore. We
That's
know
true.
one thing. Well, no, we know two things. We know one, MIT is the top team right now, and given we can extrapolate from the rest of that, it's unlikely that another team is going to take MIT's spot at the top. Something crazy is going to have to happen for that to change, really. It's probably the thing that I'm the most confident about predicting, is that MIT is at the top.
I want to point out that Colonel was the one who wrote Big IBS Daddies. We all argued against it. We felt that was a little kind of cocksure, but he wanted to get in there.
X added Big IBS Daddies, and I said I'll have to say something about the fact that was not me writing that.
But
you got me.
For spaces 2 through 5, we've got no fucking idea. There is no idea at all who it is, because if you look at 2, who the people have beaten, right? Like Arc has only beaten Subversive and Crosspoint. Revolution has only beaten Subversive and Crosspoint. FTD has beaten Arc and Revolution, but lost to Subversive. So, like, the moment that we start to do these comparisons, we get to this big muddy puddle of 2 and 2 teams, where there's so many interconnected. Well, if this person beat that and this person beat that, but then this contradicts that, and so on. So my point essentially in all of this is Subversive is on a rise, and the reason that they are is really interesting to me. They are not individually a great team. They're definitely, and I think a lot of people can say this, they're not winning games by, even their stompy games, they're not winning by necessarily individual lane differences. In fact, I would argue that a lot of these gold leads that we're seeing on players are coming outside of lane. There seems to be a moment in every Subversive game where they go, we are fighting now, and they do not stop.
I love
they
that.
don't stop. There is no break. They don't give anybody a time to breathe. They basically go, okay. And this is the rational explanation. And they may not agree with this, but this is from having scrimmed them a lot, from having watched them play, from just having my ass kicked by them. They go, okay, we are on paper individually the weaker team. How do we win? We make the game dirty, nasty, muddy, chaotic, and we know how to play that, and the other team doesn't. They are going to start fights. They are going to make picks. They are all committed to this vision of we are going to make the game how we want it to be. And I have never in gold, in plat, in IBS, in multiple other leagues seen a team do this on this level. It is incredible to me that Subversive is able to go, this is what we know how to play, and this is how we make that game that game.
So it sounds like, sorry, Subversive is embodying the energy. They are the example of what the Shadow Isles is from a bird's eye perspective. We look at Shadow Isles and it's chaos, and who is the best team to look at for understanding what that is? It's Subversive. Obviously, you've got MIT and you've got CPK, but really the meat of it all is exemplified in how Subversive plays. I want to get Colonel's thoughts real quick on Subversive, this chaotic, muddy team that's kind of pulling the game into their own style. I think that's the way I want to say that.
So the thing that is the most interesting to me when you look at Shadow Isles as a group is that, Leopard, you were talking about it for a second, that a lot of these teams for Arc, for Rev, a lot of these teams sitting at 2-2. It's one of those games is against Crosspoint and the other one's against Subversive. So I think Subversive is the real linchpin of this group because Subversive is getting beaten by a lot of these top two teams, but they're winning against them and FTD are the deciders of the group because their convincing wins aren't the ones against Crosspoint. They're against other 2-2 groups, which is so much more important when we're looking at a playoff race because these are 5 competitive teams because MIT is still sitting at the top. So the 4 teams we're talking about plus MIT, one of these teams doesn't make it. So it doesn't matter what your scoreline is. It matters what your scoreline is against the other teams because there are 4 of you to get the 3 remaining spots of this group. So I think FTD and Subversive are really in the driver's seat because their convincing wins are against these two teams versus Crosspoint when I'm not nearly as confident in Revolution or Arc.
What I'll say too is we're also seeing that with Arc and Revolution having beaten Subversive and Crosspoint, that now that Subversive is on the rise, things can warp, and that we're really at a point in Shadow Isles where every game really matters now, and that's not something that we really often say in Week 5.
Yeah,
and I will say too, because both Subversive and Arc, my early season predictions are absolutely screwed.
Oh, same. I don't even want to talk about my end of season.
It's going to be great to laugh at ourselves.
Oh, it's
like
going to be
5
fantastic.
Weeks.
I still have faith. I still have some faith. Just kidding. I do have faith. I'm really enjoying the way the season's playing out. And to talk about playoff some playoff consequences right now, Arc and Rev have probably, respectively, the most important matchup for the rest of the season tonight. Which, to clarify to everyone, we are recording this on Sunday, the day before Week 5, or the day of Week 5 matches. Arc, if Revolution wins, I think they've made some roster changes that we'll talk about, that we can talk about. If they win, I feel like they're whoever wins. I'm not even gonna say Rev or Arc, right? Whoever wins is honestly kind of a shoe-in for playoffs. Maybe not a shoe-in, not a shoe-in.
I would disagree because because the schedule reflects itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Arc versus Revolution is the last game of the season.
Do you think both of these teams have an equal chance to lose to Subversive?
Yes, 100%. 100%. Right now, if you were asked,
I would argue against
who the second seed is in this group, it's Subversive. If you seriously, right now, if you ask me to predict how things are going to go, it's going to go MIT, Subversive, because I think that the way that Subversive plays is that difficult to deal with.
Colonel, what are your thoughts? You said you disagree.
Yeah, I would disagree with Leopard. I think the problem is both Arc and Rev have head-to-heads over Subversive. So if Subversive wins against them, it's going to be tied. So having win with 2-0s puts them over Subversive, regardless of what you think of each team, puts them over because Subversive has to 2-0 both of them in order just to even out in terms of tiebreaker
That's
scenarios.
a good point.
So I would argue that both of them, whoever wins against the other, does have a much higher chance of getting into playoffs because whoever wins against the other is basically painted themselves into a corner where they need to at least match the score in the second round robin in order to even get themselves a tiebreaker. So
That's fair.
Subversive has really just
so
messed everything up.
Because while we still have a double round robin, honestly, because while we do have a double round robin, it does make it a little bit more open. These games all count. And because these games all count, we have to look at what has already taken place, regardless of if it reflects what we think of where these teams are currently.
So if I can transition real quick, though.
Yeah.
This brings the most important team for the second half is Crosspoint.
Okay, so I can kind of agree with that in terms of like most important, right? This is like when you say MVP or whatever.
Most important.
The most
if
important
Crosspoint beats anybody,
it's out the window. Whoever they beat is fucked.
It's really hard if you lose to Crosspoint. Like that's we can say the same thing for Abyssal in the Void.
Mm-hmm.
We can say the same thing. But Crosspoint and Abyssal have a huge chance to upset the dynamic of both groups. If they win, or even if they 2-1 or 1-2, it becomes a very big deal when we're looking at what potentially are going to be some really complicated tiebreakers that are going to make me and Feathers drink.
Let's
So
we've talked about sorry, go ahead. I just want to make sure we talk about the Void a little bit about what we know and what we don't.
Yeah, I was about to talk about the Void. We don't really know much about Void. In the same vein that we know very little about Shadow Isles, it's on a just little tiny side note. It's nice that it's not so set in stone.
Yes.
As it was in previous years. It feels great that it's
two things happen that makes this much more interesting in the Void.
Massive roster change. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, they're both roster changes. One's a competitive ruling, and then one is arguably what looks to be the MVP top laner of the Void based on the data that I have so far. Chef Boy was the MVP for top lane in the Void almost universally.
Off the roster.
There was not a person that answered for the Void that had not voted Chef Boy as a top laner for MVP. And for him to leave CBR, both of these things really, really warp what could potentially be.
If it's all right, I want to jump in and talk about CBR real quick because this is a team that I have I've had some thoughts about this team, and I've tried to be balanced, but also like transparent about my thoughts on this team. And I think I talked a little bit on it earlier, but this is a team that's just so fascinating to me, especially every week there is something new, right? I set early on, if you go back and watch some of the early episodes, I think I set some expectations that like week 3 and week 4 were going to be really deciding factors for me. And then coming into week 5, another deciding factor for like where this team's going to sit. Early on, I was concerned about about how this team would work together at that kind of abstract team cohesion level. They clearly had a lot of skill, very talented. The Beyblades game really threw me for a loop with this team. Since then, they have shown that they are a dominant force. They are top 2 contenders. They are going to make a run in playoffs. And a lot of that comes down to pure skill matchups, right? And them not falling apart as a roster. They've been consistent. This is the first change that they've made, and it's a change around something that I thought was volatile from the beginning, and it's that relationship with Chef Boy and the rest of the team. I don't know any details, right? So the only thing I can do is rampantly speculate.
From my brief conversation with their coach, what I know is, and at least what they told me, it was Chef Boy's choice to leave.
Okay. And to me, that's honestly a good sign. It means that there's not really I don't imagine there's a lot of turmoil in the other four, the core four of the roster, or at least hopefully, because this is a roster that has proven to me that they've got what it takes, and I'm a big fan of their bot lane. I'm interested to see how their strategies evolve, but it's a fast. The roster changes there. The bot god CR and like the Beyblades roster change for jungle. All these things are just adding a lot of like. While to Colonel's point, we don't know a lot, and I think a lot of that unknown stems from roster changes that are happening right now in the middle of the season that can completely disrupt where everything goes. Are there any final thoughts or anything like that before we jump into I think our predictions for next week?
I think that should be it. I think the biggest question as we look towards just what happens next week before we even look at predictions is just going to be who takes up the reign now that the top tier, the topmost echelon has sort of been lowered to the point of attainability, and who can reach towards that high is going to be important.
Two of the two key players from the top two teams in the Void aren't playing on those teams anymore. What does that mean? What does that look like this week? Do the teams show up and they say, no, we're good as a team, we're more than our parts? Or do people step up and compete? I'm gonna move on to the next slide if that's all right. So week 5 matchups. Mm-hmm. Quick preface, Decker is not with us today. He's alive. He's just not with us here presently in this call. But he did get a chance this morning to give us his predictions. And not the 2-0s or 2-1s, but he was able to quickly give us who he thinks is going to win based on these matchups. And yeah, I want to throw it over to Leper. Looks busy. Leper, are you available to talk through your thoughts on predictions here?
Absolutely not. There's no way that I can talk about the fact that SG is going to take down MIT.
You're high on SG. You're taking. You're
maybe it's just a controversial theory, right? This might be conspiratorial. Maybe it's the fact that SG has been kicking my fucking ass since November. I don't know.
Are you okay, Leper? Is something going on? Is SG...
Honestly, seriously though, like I lost my job at the beginning of February and had to go cold turkey on antidepressants, and I'm finally back to being myself.
Hey, I'm glad to hear that last part. We're here to support you, man. I do want to get some thoughts on. So first I want to say, Leper, walk us through elevator pitch this SG MIT matchup, and then Colonel, I want to get your rebuttal.
There. Oh yeah, I will. Okay. So this is my honest to goodness thing. Both MIT and SG are really, really good at not allowing other people to play their game. I am of the opinion that it's hard to explain in league terms because the way that I think about it is in Dota 2 terms. So there are concepts that exist in terms of talking about Dota 2 that aren't talked about in the same way of League. But my argument with this comes down to lane doesn't matter as much for Subversive as it does for MIT. That's one. And then second, SG's timing of when they explode is way quicker than MIT's. I think it's going to be bloody. I think it's going to be nasty. And I think that if MIT wins 2-0, that's not really that big a surprise. But if I'm going to go out on a limb and create controversy, if I'm going to get people angry at me in DMs, if I'm going to go out there and put my name on something, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to predict that SG wins 2-1. That's what I'm going to do. Because I think that SG, honestly, is going to come out here and they are going to make the game the way that they want to play. And more than a lot of these other teams, with the way that I felt when I got my ass kicked by MIT, Subversive makes me feel that same way. Where I can't breathe, where I can't set up, where I can't do the things that I need to do in order to get back in the game. Subversive makes me feel the same way that MIT does. And this is the big point for me, is that Subversive does it when we are winning the lane phase, when we're winning the early game. Subversive makes me feel the same way that MIT does when MIT kicked my ass from minute 1.
Colonel, opportunity for
So
rebuttal.
my argument against this. Oh yeah, I have to argument against this. First off, I'm just putting it on the record so everyone who watches this know. I just went back through every one of our slides. Every time MIT has had a prediction, Leopard has predicted against us. Just gonna put that out there.
Interesting.
I am a losing bet.
That'd be interesting to see. Is let's maybe in a fun little stat to do is look at all of our predictions across the season.
We can
look
do
at
that
our success rates.
in the last episode, right?
I like that.
Because I think that with all the stuff that we're going to have to do, because we don't have a gauntlet this time, I think we're going to have to do like a 3-hour episode for quarterfinals.
Yes.
Oh, Jesus.
People will. It's going to be a marathon. Colonel, finish your thought, please. Talk about this MIT versus SGG.
I think first off, before I disagree with you as much as I'm going to, where I do agree is in the highlights that you've put so far for Subversive. I think they are probably the only team that I can see in the entire group, honestly, that have a potential to take more than a game off of MIT. I think they are the only one, but I still think it's near impossible to say that hope of they can means that they will. When we look at the direct player-to-player comparisons, I think so many people have made arguments for. I mean, you have the stats, I don't. For MVPs of their group compared to Subversive, where I think while they both force you to play their game, have that same constriction that you were talking about, where you follow their rules when you play a game against them. But in terms of pure player skill, I think MIT is just so way and away higher that I have trouble saying that they're going to be able to take a game off.
So, if I may rebut slightly, Tex.
Sure. You get 2-minute rebuts.
Okay. So I can't talk across the map. I'm a top laner. I can talk Crockpot versus Roland. I'm assuming you're playing Crockpot here.
So, oh well, yes. I'm playing MIT almost.
Okay.
Because
so we is that
series, I feel like there's no reason not to.
When I've played both of them, right? The end result of the game was relatively equal in the favor of MIT and Subversive. But in lane, right? SG did that when Roland was down 2 kills and 45 CS. Mm-hmm. And Crockpot did that by killing me 3 times. And that's where a lot of this is based on.
So you're talking playing from a deficit?
So basically, Subversive has done this to FTD from behind, is what I'm getting at. Whereas MIT created this from a position of strength. And that's a lot of my foundation here. And that's all my rebuttal is. I can see where you're coming from. I'm not necessarily disagreeing. I just felt that information should be put out there of why I feel this way, right?
Yeah. Colonel, what you got, man?
Yeah, I think my rebuttal to this is just using your own words against you. Crockpot can kill you 3 times in lane, and Roland does go into a deficit into lane. And I think the problem is, while it's important to be able to do that, if you don't blast somebody in early game, it's good. It's good to have that ability, and we see that with Subversive. But you're always going to favor the one that can get the lane advantages, especially when both these teams are ones that force you to play by their rules. I think the one that's in the driver's seat to say my rules are the one, not yours, is the one that blasts you 3 kills in 10 minutes.
Well, I'm just going to say that arguably the greatest Dota 2 team of all time, when they won their first international, did so by losing every game and continually coming back from 25,000 gold deficits.
Yes.
So I personally, with my viewpoint, I'm favoring the team that regularly does this from a deficit and losing position. That's all.
I want to step in because I feel like we can rebut back and forth all day, and I love it. This is fantastic.
Yeah, we can go through this all day.
SG versus MIT is one of the most exciting matchups, right? The team atop Olympus and the team that is trying to climb Olympus.
This needs to be streamed. If you're not casting tonight and you and Paka do not cast this, I'm going to be
actually. We have already been requested to cast Fallen versus CB.
Okay. Swag. Fuck you. Fuck your money. Fuck you.
Oh my goodness. This is all in jest, Swag. It's okay. It's okay. There's just the thing that's wonderful about this double round robin and the teams that we have in right now is I wish every match was streamed. I wish we could see every single match live with some sort of commentary, some sort of like third person view, because CBR versus TFU is exciting. That's a good matchup. Another great matchup beyond SG and MIT to me, and I am a little biased here, is Arc versus Revolution. Arc vs. Revolution is two teams. I want to hear y'all's thoughts on this, but here's what I'm priming it with. What's interesting to me is two teams that can generate leads early, right? Often through top lane, have fairly consistent lanes elsewhere with their win conditions, right? But they never, when they have those leads, most of their losses come from not being able to transition those leads from mid game to mid game, or even from mid game to ending the game. I'm going to use this last week's matchup versus FTD in these two stupid freaking 15-minute games. I love it. I love that it's two 15-minute games. That's fantastic. That's the kind of League of Legends I like to see. I lie. I don't like that all the time. I like to... I'm going to let that mental tangent just go away. Anyways, point is, roping it back in for myself here. These are two teams that struggle to close out games. These are two teams that have very distinct strengths. They're also two teams that have had a meta journey across the season, right? Arcquake starts out strong. They dominate SG. They dominate CPK. And then once they started hitting real competition, we haven't seen what we thought we would see from them. Revolution has kind of been scrappy. They've been wild card. They've been volatile, right? They come in and they have tough wins against SG and CPK, and then they have some tough losses versus FTD and MIT. Like they showed strengths in both of their losses and they showed weaknesses in both of their wins. And they've had some roster changes, new support, new mid laner this week. Whoever, I believe we have a new mid starting this week that we've been playing with this last week. Mixing things up, right? We're growing the roster. We're building our infrastructure behind the scenes. It's going to be really interesting to see where things go. And this could be a big tempo swing for either team, right? Both teams need a win. Both teams need to show that, yes, we can hold our own against what is literally our most equivalent competition in the group. This is a huge match for both of these teams, in my opinion. Maybe even the biggest. Colonel, go ahead.
You said it right there at the end in terms of these two teams' equivalences. I'm going to exclude the mid lane change because until it's official in the doc. But these teams, if I could watch either a Rev game or an Art game and take off the nameplates, and I'm not sure if I'd be able to tell. They play such a similar game. They have bot lanes that aren't overly explosive. They're there. They don't tend to win or lose the game. What comes to mind would be like Upset 2 years ago in EO, where he would just win more or lose more kind of player.
Yep.
And mid laners that have had their struggles, I think, I think in terms of the mid lane trajectory, is probably the biggest difference in that Lynx has had a very tough week 1 and 2, and now is starting to prove himself in the role versus on the opposite side of the rift. I think only now are we starting to see the potential problems that Phoenix has to work out. But still, I think in their team layout, they're so similar. They have this great top laner. They have mid laners who've had struggles, who we are still looking for more from to consider them a top tier contender, and they play so similarly, and that's why I think one of them makes it and one of them doesn't, because I don't think there's room for two teams that play the exact same way, because whichever one's better than the other will find the wins they need to, and whichever one isn't will get kicked out, in my opinion.
I think one of the biggest deciding factors is, I mean, I alluded to it pretty directly with who can close out a game, right? Who can get a lead, close out a game. And I think that's how we get to that point is going to be which team, and it seems to be a trend from what I'm seeing in our conversations, is which team's infrastructure is going to support their team the best. Is Arcquake going, like you were talking about, Colonel, is Arcquake going to react from week 4 going into week 5 with that infrastructure, that coaching, that guidance to figure out what's going on and how they can really solidify themselves as a playoff team or as a playoff contending team? Same thing for Rev. For Rev, for this matchup, it's going to be drafts. It's going to be synergies of comps, playing to those win conditions, and being coached to know what those win conditions are, how you execute on that, and how you close the games out. A lot of it, I think, is going to come because of the similarities on the Rift. It's going to come from the differences off the Rift.
I disagree with 1 point.
Ooh.
I love it. Hit me with it, Leopard.
And this is why I have Revolution winning 2-0. Okay? And that is, I personally feel that with the way that Denobi plays, this much more wave management heavy style, this much more, I'm going to generate a lead by not allowing you to win, but generating CS, forcing you to take bad backs. This much more subtle, quote unquote, method of winning.
It's how you're supposed to play top lane. I'm not biased in that way.
I think Denobi is going to completely neutralize Captain Rio.
Do you think that is the only thing that Arc has?
If you turned off nameplates and had watched tape of the two teams before, you could clearly identify which side is Revolution and which side is Arc based on the way that the top laners play. And I think that the fact that Denobi is not the win condition for Revolution, but Captain Ryu is the win condition for Arcquake is going to be the major deciding factor in this match.
Colonel, what is your response, my guy? You've got some thoughts.
Yeah, I very hard disagree. I think if you look at, I will do this throughout the entire split. I did this last week too. Compare both of them to MIT, A, because it's what I know, and B, because they both have played MIT, and it's a consistent bar from which to compare. Captain Ryu played a decently good game, or set of games, playing against MIT. When Denobi, I was actually a little bit disappointed. Did not play against Crockpot. For those of you who don't know, MIT support is the only position where we don't have a sub. So when Texas power is out, we were unable to get Shadow Stealer, and Crockbot ended playing support. But that being said, Denobi played against our sub-top and had arguably less impact than I would have assumed. I think game 1, he was pretty much a non-factor. I feel like game 1 sort of just evened out into nothingness in the top lane. And game 2, in a game that I think he played very well, he roamed mid, he played Yorick, and a roam mid in an early skirmish started him 2-0 and 2. And when it mattered, and you have this fed Yorick in the side instead of pushing the tower, he walked all the way from bot lane to the Baron, where the team eventually lost that fight. And that was the only game where I was like, this is Denobi's game to prove himself. And he's not even against Crocbot. He's against Wales, who is the sub behind Crocbot. And Denobi didn't, in my mind, prove himself the way I expected him to. I think that should have been a 3-game series, and all of that could have been a 3-game series on his back. So I think Captain Ryu is something I'm more strongly confident in compared to Denobi. I think the reason, because I did predict 2-1 for Revolution. I think the bigger difference is the mid lane. I think the mid lane is this is the first time I've said this to Split, but I think the mid lane is where I have much more confidence. Revolution.
There's going to be so much that we're going to learn this week. Hopefully learn this week in the Shadow Isles.
Every week when we look like idiots.
See, the issue, no, we're learning stuff every week, but we're
the
also
nice part about Colonel and I fighting is one of us always looks smart, and it's usually Colonel.
Yes.
See, what I'm here to do is I'm here to
I'm not
look
as smart as I look.
You look smart? What?
Leper has been making me look.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I make him look smart because I argue very, very much against him. He's usually right.
It helps to have a winning team. We're messing. Where do we sit in this? Okay, it's me at the top, then Leper, then Colonel. Okay, just making sure I remind myself of this. I'm kidding. With Revolution,
I see that I'm garbage. It's okay.
With Revolution, no, I'm really excited for these matchups. When I say there's a lot to learn, every week we're learning new things, and then we're learning new questions that we have that we didn't know we needed the answer to, right? Like every week we get answers to questions that we had from the previous week, but we kind of forget about those because there's just more questions. There's more questions. This is the beauty of IBS. This is the beauty and the terror of IBS, right? It's every week is something so volatile, so new, so just ever changing that you never really know. You're never on solid ground, but it's exciting. My last thought on the Rev thing is, to your point about the mid game plays on the Yorick, how Ryu plays, how the teams play up against each other, the volatility in the mid lane. That's my favorite word today, is volatile.
Volatility
it comes down to that execution of win conditions. It comes down to how do you coach these teams off the Rift to figure out how to win games on the Rift. That's where I want to see things go. I want to make sure that we give our due diligence to equally as exciting matchups in the Void. So we've got VBU versus Beyblades. We've got CBR versus the Fallen University. And we've got Abyssal versus GSG. Now, let's walk through here. And Colonel, you've got the biggest outlier. Let's see. Do you have the biggest outliers?
He does.
Yeah, you have VBU winning 2-1 over Beyblades.
I didn't realize that. I do. All right. So let's go down the list. I'm glad, although Leper isn't as glad about having 2 streams both in the Void. I'm really glad about it because I know a lot about Shadow Isles from obviously having my team compete in it, and the Void is a giant question mark for me. I would say even more so than Shadow Isles because of the roster changes that we have. We've talked about it a bit before, but the competitive ruling, Bakad is no longer the Group A terror that he was. He's no longer going to be rampaging across all these teams. And now and then TFU is this question mark on top of the standings where we don't really know what their but we don't really know what they're going to bring. I have yet to see their sub play. This week is going to be the first week that we do get to. Fallen is a giant question mark, but at the same time, we have teams in the middle of the standings that, regardless of what happens on the top, regardless of if TFU or CBR comes out on top with both their roster changes, VBU versus Beyblades is important because the playoff race is still very well alive. And I think less so to a small extent, but just like Shadow Isles, one good team will not make it. to
Yep.
playoffs, and that's why the VBU BB matchup, and also GSG's matchup, because we did have a reschedule. I'm not sure when that game's going to be played though. For GSG's last week game against Fallen. Oh no, it's not rescheduled. It's because of the competitive ruling. GSG now is back in the race in my mind. So who comes out on top and who falls to that number 5 position is a big question mark, and that's why all of these games are incredibly important.
Yeah, for me, talking about importance of games, VBU and Beyblades, to me, it feels like both teams are gasping for air, but in two different ways. So VBU is a team that started out with some breathing room and have steadily been the room is coming up, right? The room is filling up with water, and they're at the top trying to catch a breath. If they get a win tonight, it's another week, another chance to stay closer in that playoff, closer to securing a playoff spot. Whereas Beyblades, they're draining the room of water, right? They're like, we figured it out. We're starting to figure it out, and we're pushing for that top spot, for that playoff spot. And I think whichever team loses this should be really concerned because that would put them in contention with Goon Squad Gaming, who's a team that is not bad, right? Put them in contention with Abyssal Emerald, who honestly, like, they might be winless, but still has a chance to take games off of people. And you lose this week, and that could be like, if EBU loses this week, that could be the death knell, right? That can be the sign that, like, they've been on a slide, but it's kind of, we don't know yet. But if they lose this week, that slide, that's a slide, and they are risking not making playoffs.
If we look at what VBU has done for the past 2 weeks, it leaves so much room for worry, right? Like CBR is fine. It's fine to lose 2-0 to CBR, but that was when they were still tied together. So not taking a single game is disappointing. But then look back another week and you dropped a game to Abyssal. So VBU, ooh, VBU, it's in a very, very precarious position here
Yes.
where I favor a lot of teams over them, and until they prove me wrong, I can't really have confidence in this roster.
So this is what I'm gonna say. As resident dad, whether abusive or not, depending on who you ask, right? A lot of people come to me with random shit about their teams, right? People come to me to ask advice. People have questions when they're unsure what to do because I like helping IBS players. And it's a really difficult space. It's a lot of people's first experience with competitive. So I've talked with multiple people on VBU, and it's not good. It's from the general vibe that I get is that there's multiple factions disagreeing, and it's very, very stressful right now.
Within
And I
VBU.
don't think that that's going to stop, unfortunately.
That's, I mean, honestly, that's kind of,
It kind of shows in how they play. Like that's
yeah.
the thing is it's not a terribly big surprise to hear that. Unfortunately. I really hope they pull it out because they've got great players. But I really have got some questions in that area.
Colonel, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the more stable of the two is definitely Beyblades, and I'm just gonna put this out there. I was on 2 different hype trains from the entire season, and Beyblades was one of them. I from the very beginning, someone go back to week 1 or week 2. I think Willow is a very good jungler. With Botgod out of the picture, potentially the best jungler in this group.
Okay.
And
Okay.
with that kind of strength, and their mid 2v2 has started to really click. I think Beyblades more so. I mean, across the rift, VBU has to stabilize, right? But I think Beyblades is on a very steady climb, and I think Beyblades may just use the stumbling VBU as a footstool to climb the standings and potentially threaten either CBR or the Fallen, who are both potentially weaker states than they were just a week ago. So I think Beyblades is the bigger question mark of, can they seize the opportunity?
It's a chance for them to rocket up the standings. It's a chance for them to solidify, okay, not our wins aren't a fluke. Our growth is not a fluke. We are here to stay. We are here to contend. We are here to compete. And that's huge for a team's attitude, especially coming in. Generally speaking, not heavily favored, right? Like, based Colonel over here obviously knows all knowing, omnipotent, omniscient Colonel. But I think for the most part, a lot of people did not have high expectations. Not necessarily low expectations, but not equally not as high expectations of Beyblades. I want to talk about some teams that have had some mixed expectations. Abyssal and Goon Squad. This is one of those matchups where Abyssal can kind of play spoiler, where Abyssal can mix up what's going on, right? Like they can, if GSG loses to TFU and then GSG loses to Abyssal, the rescheduled match and then this week's match, that's two teams that are tied at the bottom that can both contend with whoever slides from the VBU Beyblades matchup. But I don't know. Like this matchup, I am still on that GSG hype train. I still have confidence in them making playoffs, showing us that they are a better team than they were last split, and they are worthy of like the expectations that some of us rightfully or maybe not so not so appropriately placed on them.
Well,
go ahead.
We can say this in all actuality, in fact, or I'm not a statistics major, which I never was, but we can say, if my understanding of statistics is correct, GSG is 100% better than they were last split.
Oh, 100, infinitely better. What is something about dividing by zero, right? Like 1 times 0 is 0, right? So it's infinitely amounts better. Something versus
One
nothing.
is greater.
I don't think that their losses are as aggressive, right? Like, how do I say this? I think them losing this split has been more competitive than it was last split, right? Last split it was just getting walked over. This split it's competitive. Some of their games are not great, but they're still competing. And if they win against Abyssal tonight, that gets me excited about where this group goes. It puts it more in line with Shadow Isles, with that just motley crew in the middle, right? Just a mess in the middle. If they lose against Abyssal, that's exciting for Abyssal. I still think that puts more pressure in some scenarios on whoever loses the VBU Beyblades matchup. That you cannot, if you lose that matchup, you cannot lose to Abyssal. You can't just assume those games are going to be wins, and you can't lose against GSG. You can't just assume you're going to win those games. There's a lot of stuff that's going. Again, it goes back to this goddamn thing with, pardon my language, but this thing with IBS where every week you get questions answered, but those answers don't matter because even bigger, crazier questions come up. Colonel, what's your response here?
I think that for probably the only time that we've seen so far throughout the split, GSG is a bottom table team that has full control of their own destiny. They have their only win is against a team that they will eventually be competing for a playoff spot for. It's not against Abyssal. They're playing them now. It's not against a top contender that they will never touch. It's against a team that they have a very high chance of seeing in the. They did win their 2-0 against Beyblade.
We lost you at very high chance. Could you start from there?
They do have a very high chance to see Beyblades and GSG in that 3, 4, 5 race for the final 2 playoff spots. So since GSG's only win is against Beyblades, GSG has full control of where they're going to be going from here. If they win this game, they have a head-to-head already won and a strong head-to-head because it's a 2-0 against one of the teams they're competing against, and GSG has near full control. But if they lose this game, Abyssal has basically, in my mind, taken them out of the race.
I apologize to everyone's ears. I just coughed and didn't mute the right thing, so I just coughed right into everyone's headset. I'm used to muting Discord when I cough, and I did not mute OBS because I am recording today, so I deeply apologize. That's an interesting point. They have control over the Destiny. They have a head-to-head matchup with it's Beyblades, right? That they've beaten, I believe.
Yep.
Am I crazy here?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Week 1, Beyblades win. So, yeah, it's this week sets up some stuff that I want to talk about more next week and the week after, which is playoff scenarios. Leopard, do you have any
We're
thoughts?
gonna have to do a playoff watch every week.
At this point, yeah, I think round robin 2 is gonna have. I mean, we're starting to get into the point where like, okay, we've set the foundations. Round robin, set the playing field, really. Round robin 1, and now round robin 2 is going to come in and say, all right, every match, especially given the volatility of the middle of the pack for both groups, there's that word again, volatility. I need to get a thesaurus and just look at the different words for that, different words to say the same thing. But the idea is still there, right? There's this dynamism.
We can talk about the competitiveness of the IBS league.
There you go. Competitiveness. I like that.
We really need to badger Decker about the GSG midseason invitational.
That needs to happen. I can't believe a whole week has already gone by since last time we recorded.
I guess this is the thing that I will try to do. We'll talk about it, but I think we'll lock the standings after today. We'll try to just kind of bullshit tiebreakers because there's going to be a lot of ties, and then try to set up stuff between the teams.
Go ahead.
I think one last thing to go over is the CBR TFU matchup. It's sort of something that we have been sort of dancing around. I don't know if anyone really wants to be the one to try and call this because there's so many question marks.
I will.
But
I will fall on the sword.
Yeah, you go for it. Go for it.
TFU's going to win because they didn't have a roster change this week that they weren't prepared for.
Okay. So that's my ask is, are you putting, it seems like you're putting a lot of weight on that top lane roster change. Do you think they were a lot?
When you have somebody that quite literally runs over the other top lane almost every week, right? Somebody that is almost universally considered to be the best player in their role in this division, that is such a large component of how you play. To lose them 48 hours before your next match, right? Without a clear person in place to step into that. Based on the roster sheet, TFU has 2 different junglers. They've played Pagina already this season, and they've got a different person in place right now in the roster sheet, right? Just that fact alone.
They've played in this scenario before already. They played without Bogdan.
Right, they've already played without this, right? That's all that this is, right? Like if Chef Boy had not left literally last night?
I think
Friday
night. Friday night, I thought.
Friday night. 36 hours ago, as at the time that this is being recorded, right? I would feel very differently, right? I would definitely be going in a CBR favored thing because momentum is on their favor. Not only were they doing well since the Beyblades loss in ZGG, they're undefeated right now in EDL, I think, right? Like they're on this upward move. But the fact that you lose one of your primary win conditions, not even 2 full days before you have to play again,
that's a really good point.
When you're doing well, is a really, really hard thing to overcome. That's not to say they can't. I mean, they've got great players. They've got a really strong bot lane. They've got a mid laner who likes to smoke nice cigars. I mean, you can't really go wrong in that direction. So then you've got arguably one of the best junglers in the league, right? I think at this point it's between Swag and Willowhaven in this side as far as junglers go. So it's hard when you have this kind of major roster change very, very suddenly.
One of the things I touched on earlier that's branching off of what you're talking about, and I'm coming to agree with you here. not agree with you. I'm coming to understand where you're coming from with the impact, both on a time scale and kind of conceptual abstract, for the sake of the team, right? Meta level impact for the team is so. I talked about earlier. Chef Boy played their strategy, right? They've got this mid game. Sorry, they have supportive playmaking supports and junglers. They have hyperscaling ADC style, and they have a mage, a carry mage style, right? Any of you Ari, that kind of shit in the mid lane. The bridge, right? That gets them over the mid game hump. That enables them to control the map, to control objectives, to choke out the other team. Was this mid game bruiser, Shyvana, Volibear, Viego, right? This guy who becomes who put the focus on him, right? Even if he wasn't winning the lane, he would always put the focus on him through split push, through TP plays, and make it so that you cannot ubiquitously contest objectives. You can't ubiquitously or effectively, you can't effectively shut down these scaling carries as you would like to because you have this mid-game threat that's going to take objectives, give global gold, all this other shit, right? Now that that's gone, do you puzzle piece this in, just copy and paste someone in that can do the same thing? Are you going to find someone in time? What's the impact that this is going to have for their draft strategy, for their win conditions, right? What's this going to expose to them? How do they mix it up? How do they adapt?
Yeah, I think I said it before and I'll say it again. I was on two hype trains. I was on the Beyblades hype train and I was on the CBR hype train. And I'm a little bit sad because the CBR hype train has just lost its conductor, and now I'm incredibly worried. Like this was a roster that individually I think had a lot of pieces I was super confident in, and it wasn't like Subversive where their team play is what's giving them these wins. It wasn't like TFU where one star player is just way and away better than anyone else on the Rift. It was that in all 5 roles, I was confident that nobody was a weak link. And now the strongest of those links, or arguably the strongest of those links, is gone. And I think having a weak link is so much easier to deal with from a your team perspective. It's so much easier to deal with. I have one player that's a weak link than to have a missing link. The chain has been broken, and now it's going to be all on CBR to find a way to fix this. Where if they had a weaker player the entire split, I'd be so much more confident because having a weak link is fine. Everyone has one. But now they don't have a weak link. They just have a missing link.
That's an interesting point. I want to give ourselves a chance to talk about. Sorry, do we want to talk about FTD versus CPK?
We can talk about them.
Let's use that as a transition to talk about our predictions.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking.
I mean, we've pretty much been talking about predictions anyways. So let's talk about FTD versus CPK, and let's go into highlight matches. Let's do that.
Okay. I think we're universal here. I can't really see Decker putting FTD as a 2-1.
Yeah. I think FTD is a team that knows their win conditions. That's one of the reasons I think they were able to succeed against ARC. While ARC did have their own fair share of problems with throwing two games that they were winning, FTD did a great job of stalling, from what I can tell, of playing to their win conditions, which is, and Leper, you pointed out to me, when I look at the damage share from this last weekend's games, it's all on the ADC. And what that tells me, given the comp that they have, is they know they know that they need to set up for their ADC to do damage. They pick and play towards that type of play style, and that allowed them to be able to pull out a win from the jaws of defeat. And I don't think
Lord Snuggle.
I gotta compliment
Lord Snuggle.
I gotta compliment Snugglebutt here. I haven't gotten to play against him a lot, but when I do, I kick his ass. I'm just kidding. He's very competitive. He's a very effective player. Especially, he's good at staying alive, staying safe in the laning phase. Compliment him with Chubby Chernobyl, and they're a really solid bot lane that, like we said, They become a win condition later into the game. Teams like CPK are going to get those upset wins, not against someone who knows how to close out games, who knows how to get win condition, who knows their win conditions and how to excel. They're going to get wins against teams like Arc and Rev, who are strong early, who have decent mid games, but don't know how to close out games, that are not as effective playing towards their win conditions. I think it's a solid 2-0, and I'm not too concerned about this game.
If we weren't pressed on time, I would ask, how does CPK win?
I don't think that changes how much time we have, because I don't know if any of us have a really good answer for that.
I don't.
My closest answer is 25-minute Ws. I think they play they play quick, they play aggressive, they play the SG style of just fuck you, I'm going to fight you, right? They're going to muddy the waters and make it so that you don't have the chance to slow the game down and play to a win condition if you're losing early. You win early, you win lane, you win early, you try to close it out, right? That's the only way I see CPK winning, and that's kind of that's a generic answer. I understand, I know, but how do you put the onus on a team that knows how to, like, how do you put the stress, right? How do you make a team that knows how to win, right? I know it's a weird thing to say, but knows how to win games with their composition. Maybe they aren't great at executing during the early and mid, but knows how to close games out. How do you put the onus on them? How do you make them falter on that? How do you stress them out? How has FTD lost in the past? And I think it's just putting them on their heels the entire game, playing high tempo, focusing on just choke out objectives and get those early dragons, get those heralds to take key turrets. That's what I think should happen. I don't know if they can execute on it, but I think that's what would have to happen. Colonel, what you got? Colonel, you there?
I think we lost him because that's a whole long time to hold that pose.
He is contemplating deeply.
I think I need to cap this. Okay.
Damn are you back, Colonel?
Finally back.
Did you catch what I was saying?
Yes.
Okay. What's your response?
He was doing a really good impression of the thinker for a while.
Yes.
So here's my problem with this matchup more in general. I think it's hard to talk about FTD here because the ball isn't in their court at all. Like this is very much an expected win for them, and the bigger question mark is CPK, because FTD, I would be very disappointed if they were to lose this, but the bigger question mark and the thing that I'm hoping, or just to spice up the group a little bit, is that CPK can finally prove themselves. They could finally start to say, we've had good looks and we can finally put them together to find game wins and series wins. And I don't have confidence yet. I feel like regardless of what you think of the roster, you can't really have confidence when they are still winless, the only winless team in this group, where it's like FTD should have every reason to not lose this, and it's up to CPK to change that narrative.
I would say too that you can say this as a factual statement. I think, just skimming really quick, Crosspoint is the only team remaining in IBS to not win an individual game.
Oh yeah, because Abyssal has taken a match off EBU.
Yeah.
Yeah, or not a match, a single game. Yeah, a game. Interesting.
Yeah. Highlight matchups, right?
Yes. Let's talk about it.
SG versus MIT.
Okay. And your predictions for that?
When MIT 2-0, it won't be.
What'd you say, Colonel?
It sounds like a hype matchup, but then MIT is going to 2-0, and it won't be a hype matchup anymore.
No. I mean, I may have predicted one thing, but I'm all here for the hype train. I'm excited to see if it's even a. I want to see a 1-1 series. Like, I want to see a series that goes 3 games. That's what I want to see. I want to see a series that goes 3 games.
I think the most likely one, if we're talking about close games, like in terms of if we were going to watch this and what is the most exciting on the edge of our seat series, it's going to be Arc vs Revolution this week.
Yes.
So my Shadow Isles match is Arc vs Rev. I think with the trajectory the two teams are on, the dynamic between the teams that we've talked about a lot, it's this off the Rift stuff that can impact the play on the Rift. That is really exciting to me because that is honestly growth in the the community, right? Like we're at a point where infrastructure has a serious impact on how these teams can compete against each other. When in the past it's, is my team going to skill check you and be better than you? Yep. Okay. See you later, right? And then you don't get that infrastructure battle. You don't get the draft kingdoms or the fights in draft and the fights off the rift, basically, right? The matches off the rift until playoffs or finals.
Top to bottom, this is the best season of IBS ever.
Undisputed.
Yeah.
Top to bottom, this is the best season.
From having been, I think I'm the only one that, at least here, that's been a part of every single split of ZGG since it was ZGG.
Correct.
And it is completely undisputed that this is the best split. There are more teams that are competitive and more teams that, while haven't been competitive in some weeks, turn into competitive teams over other weeks. Like we see a lot in IBS, the top teams stay top teams and the bottom teams stay bottom teams. And the only time that changes is when we hit playoffs and one top team falls apart or one top team clicks and all of a sudden it goes God mode. That's the only changes that we've seen. And other than that, it's been very, very much playoffs is how you expect it from seeing week 3. And to see that that's not the case is really awesome.
The closest that I can come to that in my time here, at least, was Split 5, where you had teams like Ignium, Classic, Feed the Dream, Atlas, that really just kind of subverted that completely subverted those initial early season expectations. But even then, there became this very, very clear divide, and that doesn't seem to exist. And
well, it seems to exist on a much smaller extent. Right?
It does. Just like we have questions comparing the two sets of data that we have, right? Those are where the questions are. But internally in those, you have very few outliers, really, in there, that you have the majority of matches every week feeling significant. And that, I think, is a huge success for the way that the format has been. So, I don't know how much of it is teams, but also the format contributes.
I think the format has a huge impact. I don't think it's definitively one thing or the other. I think it's obviously a combination of a lot of factors. I think about, this is my second split being involved in ZGG. Last split, excuse me, coffee burp. Last split had, at the bottom of the bracket, you had going into Gauntlet, right? I'm trying to remember what Gauntlet looked like. You had Rifters, you had FTF, obviously Rifters weren't even in the Gauntlet at that point, but just bear with me. Rifters, FTF, EOU, and then MIT last split, right? 4 out of 10 teams, GSG, 5 out of 10 teams were kind of non-factors, right? These were teams that didn't matter. And
by the end of the season,
no offense to these teams. I'm sorry.
Top teams, and then you had everybody else. You had VBU, you had FTD, you had Revolution, and you had RAR, and it was kind of universally understood that things were going to go down between those. And then you had the other 6, and that's not the case here.
That's really exciting. I want to focus us back in.
Sorry.
Quick. No. This is great. I'm so excited about all this. This is really cool stuff. On the Void side, what is Colonel?
I'm super curious what everyone else's answers are as well.
Do you want to go first? Or you want us to go first?
Sure. I'll go first, but I'm not gonna split it into one because I think there's very clearly 2 that are super, super, super important. And one of them I will be casting, so I think that one probably takes the edge for me just because it's in my heart. But we'll see which one is more important. But I think VBU versus Beyblades, we talked about it a little bit before, but this is an important matchup because one of these has the potential to make it, and one of them has the potential to fall out of playoffs. And
that one's streamed too, which is even more pressure.
Yes. Actually, both of these games are going to be streamed. And the other game being CBR versus TFU, streamed on the second channel by me and Paka. If you want to come watch, please do. But that one has bigger question marks, but less implications, right? These 2 teams from their standings as they stand now are on the top, so it'll be much harder for one of them to fall out. But at the same time, there's a lot of expectations and a lot of big shoes to fill that I don't even know. I don't even know if the teams know how to fill them. I think CBR is probably still trying to figure out how to fill those shoes of Chef Boy. And I think lucky for TFU that they realized 2 weeks in advance that what was going to come was going to come, and practicing with their sub junglers is important, because Bakad was a menace, and this team needs to now, they by week 2 had proven themselves.
If you're
And
gonna
now they have
jungle,
to
like do it
themselves.
seriously is what is the message here. If you're gonna gangplank jungle, because those barrels will clear the Raptor camp really, really efficiently. Do it for real. Don't
Do it
collect
better.
TP into the enemy base and run into Fountain.
Do it better.
That's a whole other conversation.
That being said,
but
I'm gonna talk about the series that you haven't mentioned.
Go for it.
And I will say, though, you should tune into the second stream, because Pakapal is a cutie and you need to watch it and stare at his adorable face.
Don't stroke his ego too hard.
I mean, it's really hard not to when it fills up the entire room. You just rub against it and are stroking just by being in his presence. GSG versus Abyssal. This is my highlight matchup of the Void.
What?
Yeah,
Why?
yeah. Because this matchup could change everything.
Does it though?
It could.
I don't think it changes much.
What happens if Abyssal wins? What happens if Abyssal starts getting the momentum? Because Abyssal has the power to change the entire scape of playoffs. So does GSG. What happens when GSG wins and they start getting that momentum? They start feeling good about themselves and start moving back up. To me, in terms of actually what teams end up in playoffs, this is the most important match of the week.
For any GSG fans, I think they'd be hard pressed to not agree with you, because this game is a make or break for their season.
Yes, I would agree. This is the biggest game of their season so far. This is the biggest game of their season because of everything before it.
Yes.
It's not the biggest game in terms of like all other games excluded. This is the biggest game. It's because they haven't won a game since week 1, and they haven't won a match, since week 1. They need this win to be competitive with the loser of the VBU Beyblades game, which is my together those two are my personal highlight matchups, and I'm excited for CBR TFU as well. Like, honestly, the only match that I'm not chomping at the bit for is FTD CPK. Every other matchup is exciting to me.
Yeah.
And even then, FTD CPK has some interesting implications, right? From a CPK perspective, from a team that's winless, that is literally winless in every way. What's going to happen there? So when I go back to the GSG Abyssal game, there's big implications for both teams within the microcosm of their splits. There's implications in the context of, if GSG wins and VB loses, or if Beyblade loses, right? There's so many branching paths that lead into playoffs that just has me excited, both on the top and bottom of the rosters, right? Colonel, what you got, man?
I think I just want to put this out there to cover all of our butts just in case. But you're right. Every one of these games is important, except for the FTD CPK one, where I'm very much expecting, because we have said that CPK is gonna 2-0 stomp and then just make us all look like idiots, and then which would be a little bit awesome, because that makes
Man,
this
with the way that I've been playing today, and if I get DDoSed again,
I'll make sure to do it. I'll grab a second computer just to DDoS you.
So I've got a thought.
Yeah, what's that?
But we got anything else before I close us out?
No, hit us with it.
So we all this morning woke up groggy. Colonel and I sounded like we just rolled out of bed.
Because I did.
And same here, right? We were having our coffee and we said, Decker's not going to be here today. Let's just make this quick and casual. And we have gotten the longest episode that we've had so far.
This is true.
This is true.
I don't know what that says about us, except that you should fill out the MVP form.
Yes.
You should fill that out. So that I don't have to sit here and give significant weight to the fact that Urgot is the best top laner.
I would argue. So, because I'm a boomer,
Or that CB Royal is going to win a league that they're not even in. Because with only 10 responses, that's a significant data point. 10% of perform responders say that a team that is not in this league is going to win. Fill out the form.
I'm going to fill out the form just to say that Urgot's the best top laner in ZGG.
Okay.
Best top NA. Okay. We will
I don't
put
intend to
a
throw out
link.
data,
We will put a link to that announcement to that form in the announcement for this when we go live tonight.
Well, I can't do that because I'm currently on forced sabbatical, so I don't have the ability to make that announcement. Guess who is?
I got you.
That way, if I'm remembering.
Yeah, you got it. It's one up. It's
I
me.
got double
It's me.
With that being said, though, enjoy the games tonight. Have fun. This has been Silver Scraps episode 5.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night.